Ok. Hola, buenas tardes, bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Mi nombre es Juan Carlos Ortiz y al día de hoy le damos la bienvenida a la doctora Dori Tunstal, perdón, a nombre del director de la facultad, doctor Juan Ignacio del Cueto, y del coordinador del programa, maestro Enrique Ricalde, te damos la bienvenida, Dori. Hoy concluimos las actividades de toda esta semana. Han sido muy interesantes y enriquecedoras y te damos muchas gracias por todas las experiencias compartidas. Bueno, les voy a dar una muy breve descripción, biografía de Dori para que podamos iniciar esta sesión. Dori Tunstall es antropóloga, diseñadora, intelectual pública y defensora del diseño que trabaja en las intersecciones de la teoría crítica, la cultura y el diseño. Dori es la primera mujer afroamericana que funge como decana de la Facultad de Diseño en Ontario College of Art and Design University, y ella es una líder reconocida en el tema de la descolonización de la educación, del arte y el diseño. Todo eso lo hemos comprobado en las últimas 4 actividades que hemos realizado durante toda esta semana. Ha sido un encuentro que nos ha dejado muchos aprendizajes y una vez que mencioné eso, le cedo la palabra a Dori. Nuevamente, Dori, muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias a ti. Muchas gracias por la invitación. Yo encantada, enjoyed muchas de las conversaciones y presentaciones y los piensas muy sofisticadas de la comunidad aquí a UNAM. Primero, voy a dar the land acknowledgement. Reconocemos a los territorios tradicionales y ancestrales de las Nahua, Mexica, Ninjañu, Otomi, quienes son los custodios y propietarios originarios de la tierra en la que hoy nos reunimos. Es un lyric de una canción, se llama A Change is Going to Come. It is originally sung by Otis Wilson, and es una canción sobre la condición de esperanza por los pueblos negros en los Estados Unidos. So this talk se llama A Change is Going to Come, una presentación de la diseño, historias negras y futuros especulados, especialmente como cantar, se puede contar la historia y futura de los pueblos negros through via diseño. Again, just a part of the lyrics in the sense of la vida por los pueblos negros en los Estados Unidos u otros países es una vida muy difícil, porque hay un estructura de racismo y opresión y discriminación. Pero es una comunidad, siempre hay esperanza y resilience, ¿cómo se llama en español? Resilience. And the trabajo para dar un vida bueno por la última generación, for the next generation. But pregunta es, ¿cómo puede contar una historia de la experiencia de los Juegos Negros a través del diseño? Fue una presentación uh, I gave to Cooper Hewitt. Cooper Hewitt es la Museo de Diseño Nacional de los Estados Unidos. Es un parte de los museos Smithsonian. Yo fuiste la lectura de Morse and I held them accountable for the fact that actually you cannot tell, no puedo contar la historia de la experiencia de los pueblos negros de sus collections. Well, ¿qué es negro? What is black? Por mí y por otros, black means los individuos que se identifican a sí mismos son etiquetados socialmente como los pueblos negros de ascendencia africana, incluidos los africanos o personas de ascendencia africana del Caribe, América del Norte, y of course América Latina. 60 años, por 360 años, 60, 12 millones africanas were stolen. I always like to refer to it, were stolen from Africa and brought to the New World by European settlers. Un pequeño porción van a Norteamericana. The vast majority went to South America and the Caribbean. And to the point where in muchas ciudades, como la Ciudad de Mexico, in the mid-1600s, the number of enslaved Africans outnumbered Europeans. So es una historia de la Ciudad de México en México también. In my presentation for Cooper Hewitt, I was trying to find where's the black design, and hay muchos resultados, but none of them were relevant, or actually only a handful were relevant. Como eso. So this was an apron from South Africa, cerca 1896. Hay una status cloth de Democratic Republic de la Congo, cerca 19th century. It's a fact that a quarter of the Africans who were stolen from Africa and brought to North America came from Angola. And then another quarter arrived labeled from Senegambia. And this is important to know because there's a story that as ascendientes de África no conocemos a dónde where we're from, where we came from. But we do know. And we engage with that history of where we come from and who we are through the objects that we make. So this was also found in the Cooper Hewitt materials. It's a print called Black Revolution from 1969. It's designed by Lev Niels, who's an important Black graphic designer, especially during this time. Did a lot of documenting of the Black experience. This is probably one of our most famous Black painters, Romer Howard Bearden, artist, known for the collage work that he did. His collage was turned into a poster, Se llama Come Sunday, and it was part of the bicentennial print, so the 200th anniversary, the establishment of the Estados Unidos. They did a series of prints to represent the diversities of the histories of people in the United States. And so this is one of the prints. And what it's showing, which is muy importante, if the image before is about revolution, and there's always been fighting against oppression and discrimination by the Black community. There's been a long history of rebellion up until you have to even see the hashtag Black Lives Matter as a continuation of that rebellion against oppressive structures that have been put upon the community. But as equally important is rest. And so what this image is, you know, sitting in the on the porch, resting, you know, taking care of our elders. So that is just as important a part of understanding the Black experience as the experience of rebellion and revolution. And this is the last item that they have in the Cooper Hewitt, which was the Do the Right Thing poster designed by Black American artist and designer Art Sims. And why this particular poster was considered important and kept in its archives of the Cooper Hewitt was because it was the first public, I guess, display through film and graphics of what comes to be defined as a hip hop culture. Now, la cura de hip hop es mundial, is global. But it comes from a time and a place and a people. And it's really important to remember that it originated out of traditions of the Caribbean and the United States and communities in the Bronx and Brooklyn and other places who were experiencing tremendous violence from the police, who were experiencing the decimation of their communities due to drugs. It was a form of reporting of what was happening on the streets. Now, hip hop has moved away from that, but I think even even today, as hip hop has become a global phenomena, the aesthetic and that sense, again, of rebellion, of resilience, of speaking back to power through whatever means we have available. So if we can't get into the newspapers, then we'll create it through song. If we can't get the songs played on the radio, we'll sell them as mixtapes from the back of our cars. That is the spirit, I think, of hip hop that around the world everyone embraces when they embrace hip hop. So what I showed, so I don't ever think of time. El tiempo no es un line, línea, es un spiral por mí and otros. And so de la colección de Cooper Hewitt, solamente puedo contar una historia de la 1900 y 2000. es una historia incompleta. So how can I complete the story? So first, I thought I would ask my friends and my relatives. So because es un porte es un importante parte de la comunidad negro es the necesitamos uh, vivir con nosotros. Necesitamos rely on nosotros. Solamente nosotros por nosotros. And so I set up an experiment to crowdsource what I should put in a museum. What would we put in a museum of Black design things? You don't have to take this down because it wasn't very successful. But I did put it out there and it did generate some conversation and some discussion. But I only got 2 responses, and this is from Silas Monroe, who I mentor, so he felt obligated to contribute. And again, did contribute in ways that were really important. He's a very important figure in defining the space around Black graphic design. And I'll show you more of his work. So, ¿por qué mis hermanos no pueden ayudarme when I called? And it was because se casan. We were very tired. When the call came out, we were still in the midst of the aftermath of Black Lives Matter, where still every month we were hearing of another Black life snuffed out by the police, or even members of the white community. It's also with COVID-19, and the pandemic disproportionately affected Black, Indigenous, Latinx communities. Partly we say because the stress of everyday life is a precondition. They always said like the COVID-19 was harder if you had precondition. Ser indigenista, negro y Latinx es un precondición por los I guess conditions of poor health. But coming out of discussions was, how do we define Black design? And so I set up a kind of a rubric that came out of conversation that for it to be considered a Black design, it needs to be para nosotros, por nosotros, en cambianos. Pero nosotros is recognizing our traditions of making. Por nosotros, one of the challenges of being a population that has historically and through the prison industrial complex continues to be enslaved is that we make, but we don't always make for ourselves. We make for others, we make for the state, we make for our quote unquote masters. And then in cambianos, it has to be something that makes our lives better, that allows us to build resilience. And so that in many ways is how I'm defining, and others that I work with, what makes a design Black. And es muy importante porque el diseño es la encarnación tangible de nuestra vida cotidiana y la forma en que comunicamos el significado de nuestras vidas a las generaciones futuras. That is why design it is how we give form to our everyday lives and how we communicate the meaning of those lives to future generations. So just the fact that my hermanos couldn't help me in developing this, again, speaks to the experience where we get to the point where sometimes we just don't feel we can carry on. And I'm always amazed by the resilience of the Black communities everywhere, how much we're able to carry and how much we're able to hope.
Wow,
So how would and could we tell the story of Black experience? ¿Cómo podríamos contar una historia de la experiencia de los pueblos negros? So a little bit of a history timeline, because our history timeline is a little different than others. So pre-1700, 19 before, this is 1619 is when the first enslaved Africans were brought to the United States. So there's the history before that moment. Then simultaneously, you have the revolution of the United States against Great Britain, and you have a long list of slave rebellions. From 1794 to 1861, you have the abolitionist movement, which continues today, but ended its first phase with the start of the Civil War. From 1862 to 1954, you have emancipation, Reconstruction, up until Jim Crow. And what Jim Crow was is the moment in which the Democrats of the South decided that the way in which they were going to win election is by doubling down on their racism against Black people. So in order to embrace the vote of the white working class and the white middle class, that they set up even more harsh structures of separation. So this is where you had white people and Black people not able to drink at the same water fountains. This is when you have Black folks have to sit at the back of the bus. And so in response to that, from 1955 to 1968, you have the Civil Rights Movement, where through a counterpoint of acts of nonviolent resistance embodied by the work of Martin Luther King Jr. But you also had, like, Martin Luther King Jr.'s tactics only work because you had as a counterpoint the movements of Malcolm X and Black independence and Black power. So those two work together. And then where we are now, in some ways, of 1969, is a continuation of this articulation of Black Lives Matter. Again, in the Nazis, there was a hashtag attached to it, but that sentiment has always been there as part of the community. So this is the timeline by which the design objects in my Black museum would fit. So first, we have a Asante weight. And this is actually part of the collections of the Cooper Hewitt in there, especially to the National Museum of African Art. So it's shared with that. Para nosotros, it's an unidentified Akan artist from currently Cote d'Ivoire, Ivory Coast, Ghana. Para nosotros se utilizan para medir un pulgar de oro, so it's used to um, weigh gold. And it's, we're having technical difficulties. Can we plug this back in? Maybe.
Yes.
Yes, no? It's coming. I'll stop sharing and share again. Un momento. Let's try again. Bueno, yeah. Cambianos, cuando se vincula las figuras de Mansa Musa, Mansa Musa fue, really, fue during his time, he was the richest man in the world. He had, in his trek from Ghana to give pilgrimage in Mecca, his entourage had carried so much gold that it deflated the price of gold in Egypt for 10 years. That's how much gold that he was circulating around. And so he is a figure of pride in the history, and again, this understanding that before African people were stolen from Africa, that we were a great people. We were great nations who traded. If there was inequality, the inequality was on the side of the African traders, not necessarily on the European colonizers. We'll wait one more moment to see if we can get the image back. Yeah. Let's stop sharing a second.
Then we'll change the cable and then switch the presentation.
Okay.
So they will come.
So, un momento, por favor. We're experiencing technical difficulties. And you definitely need to see the images to know what I'm talking about. Oh, wait. Oh, maybe. Is it going to last this time? Let's try. Okay, well, but this is the wrong view. You swap displays. Yay! Bueno, gracias. Okay. Segundo objeto es, se llama burial bowl. So this is a bowl that's also found at the Smithsonian Museum. And it's a beautiful example of the continuation of culture. So the bowl was made in Mississippi by los pueblos esclavizados, so enslaved Africans who've been brought to Mississippi. And on the design, on the rim of the bowl, are inscriptions of Ndinka symbols. So these are, Ndinka is the language spoken in Ghana. So even though Africans were brought from their homeland, stolen, and brought to the United States, they carried their culture with them. Those cultures continue. And this is an example of a physical, tangible example of how the sense of who they are and were and continued even in spite of the transatlantic slave trade. Moving further along on time, this is an example of the Provincial Freeman, which it was a newspaper published from 1853 to 1860. It was published by Mary Ann Shadd, who is an African American who born and raised in the United States, but actually moved to Canada in order to escape la ley esclavos fugitivos. So this was the fugitive slave law. Basically, one of the ways in which you could escape slavery in the United States was to make it to Canada. So there was what's called the Underground Railroad, which was not a physical railroad, but a pathway of allies and organizations that would safely move African peoples from enslaved states in the south of the United States further north until communities of safety. This was actually quite successful. So the United States, being the United States, passed the fugitive slave law, which meant that if you had made it from South Carolina to Massachusetts, you could still be rounded up in Massachusetts and other northern states and sent back to the slave states in the South. So a lot of people then moved even further north to Canada to escape enslavement. And what was important about her work was she was both part of abolitionists, so fighting to end slavery, but the suffragette movement as well. So a clear voice in terms of the rights of women. And Mary Ann Shadd struggled a lot actually as a publisher. In fact, the first few years, she couldn't use her own name because no one would allow a Black woman to be a head editor of a newspaper. And so, but eventually, again, everyone knows who does the real work, and she was recognized for her work. But it was difficult to maintain the publication, and eventually she moved back to the United States to become an educator and continue her work as an abolitionist and a suffragette. The next object is the folding cabinet bed. So most people know the Murphy bed, but this actually predates the Murphy bed. It was actually by Sarah E. Good in Chicago, Illinois, and she was the first Black woman to receive a patent from the U.S. Patent and Trade Office. And the origin of it is, so again, it's a thing where it's a cabinet that folds out and opens out to be a bed. So during this time, like the 1860s, that you have what's called one of the Great Migrations. So following the end of the Civil War, many Black communities who were living in the South moved to the north to cities like Chicago and New York. You also begin to see movements out west. Anything to escape the poverty and the still continued oppression that was happening in the South. So as they moved to the north, they weren't able to have a lot of space. And so because they were clustered together in these small spaces, but there still was lots of family, or even with the Great Migration, you had family and community coming to stay as part of the movement to the South, that they needed a way to accommodate multiple people sleeping, but in a really small space. But the important part of it, and when you kind of learn a little bit more about Sarah E. Good, is that it was also about being able to maintain a sense of dignity in the small spaces that they were in. So again, this is an elegant design, not very expensive. It was designed to not be very expensive, to be affordable. So it is, and so how it changed us is it allowed us to move into these new places in the north, maintaining our sense of dignity, but also maintaining our capacity to service our communities, many of those who were moving to the north as well. And this is my favorite object. So now we move to, again, the 1950s to 1968, and this is the Black is Beautiful poster from 1970. So the images itself was from the photograph of Kwame Brathwaite, but the poster itself was designed by Robert Gums, who just passed away about a month ago, and it's really heartbreaking because we were in conversations with him to come to OCAD and do a presentation and a workshop on kind of what's the contemporary expression of Black is Beautiful. And a few days after that conversation, he passed away from a heart attack. But this, I have to say, this is the poster that I can say changed my life. I was born in 1972, and because this had become ubiquitous, and this is actually the power of design, because the notion of Black is beautiful. The images of these dark-skinned women with wide noses and afro curly hair was on everything. It was on T-shirts. It was on selling hair cream. It was on pencils. It was on posters. So I, growing up as a young Black girl, having these design objects saying Black is beautiful, representing Black is beautiful, has meant that I've never, ever felt ashamed of my Blackness. And even as I enter into the spaces of being a dean, I do so with my natural hair. And, no plastic surgery to change my nose. And a deep love and appreciation for my dark skin. And this is because of the design work and the way in which this message was amplified through design that I could feel as confident being myself as I do. And then the last object I'll show is sort of, if you think of the post-69 era, is the Budweiser King and Queens of Africa promotional campaign from 1975. And this was a major, major commitment by a company to recognizing that Black people need to see themselves in ways that they imagine themselves and to be able to tell our own histories. And again, the power of design is that this was ubiquitous. Like, these posters were everywhere. Every year I would go to the Black Expo, and one of the reasons I would go there is to figure out what's the new version of the Kings and Queens of Africa calendar was going to be. So they hired 30 illustrators, 23 of which who were African American. And the names that are listed here are some of the top names in illustration, of Black illustration in the United States, if not everywhere. And this was important because it was also the year that this came out was a year where they established the Black History Month, Del Mes de la Historia Negra. So they were part of the creation of the materials that were used in elementary schools, primary schools, to reaffirm, not just for Black kids, but for everyone, the importance of Black history and how we are all have a stake in understanding that history. And I would say, how did it change this? Again, if you haven't gone seeing Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, that film would not exist in its visual language without this promotional campaign. And a couple of months ago now, I guess, got to interview Hannah Beachler, who is the production designer for Black Panther. And again, the production designer designs everything. Like, the director may have a sense of the words and the characters, but it's the production designer who gives it physical and tangible form, that from which the director selects what the images are going to be. And so she's the same generation as I am. And so, again, we had a little bit of conversation about how this promotional campaign influenced the way in which she visualized Wakanda, which, again, has changed the way in which we've seen the possibilities of Black speculative futures for our cities. So if you add all these objects together, you can tell a pretty good story now of the Black experience of design, going back pre-1600s to the fact that, again, as African peoples, the African peoples were a great people. They were traders and explorers and did so in ways without exploitation and did so in ways that was part of a global dialogue. That you have, again, in the 1700s, you still have practices of making in Africa, and then this begins to move over into the practices of making in the United States. Those connections, those African roots are not broken. They've sought to be erased, but they take form in everything that Black folks make for us, by us, and changing us. So, llamadas de la acción, because I never want to leave this kind of presentation without what should we do next. Llámenos a la gente para archivar. The beautiful thing that is happening is that we're not waiting for institutions to do our archiving, we're doing it for ourselves. So there's the People's Graphic Design Archive, and again, many of the Black communities are contributing to that to document our own heritage and history, so that our young people have a place to go, even if they don't go to design school, to see who they are and who they can be. My friends and people who I mentor, Silas Monroe, who I mentioned before, was the only one who contributed to my database, and his indigenous partner in Polymode, they developed what they're calling the BIPOC design history. And so they've done two versions of that. There's the Black design in America, African Americans, the African diaspora in graphic design. So working with some of the top graphic designers, Black graphic designers in the world, Saki Mafuntikwa is from Zimbabwe, Pierre Bowens is from the United States, Kelly Walters is from the United States, that they've created an online curriculum available for purchase, in which you can follow these experts in understanding what has been Black design in America. They recently, last year, did a version in terms of Latinx stories of graphic design, Borderlands and La Frontora. So again, assembling an international group of designers to be able to speak to what is the Latinx history. And I hear coming soon, they're going to do one for Indigenous history, which is what one of my faculty will be contributing a lot to that one. There's podcasts available. So Revision Path is probably now, you can see they're on episode 480. So these are 480 interviews with Black designers, UX specialists, developers, et cetera, Black creatives. And so now is one of the largest compendiums of Black design knowledge, probably in the world. Award-winning. Some of the episodes have actually are part of the archives at the National African American Museum as part of the Smithsonian, including one that I'm in. There are books that are coming out or existing. So this is Black and Brown Latinx Design Educators, Conversations. So Kelly Walters is kind of assembled and edited these lists of essays about people's, not just their experiences of being Black, Brown, and Latinx designers, but also the kinds of assignments that they give their students in the pedagogy of how they educate for diversity. Coming out just this year was the Black Experience in Design. So again, just a collection of essays of various Black designers, mostly focused on the United States, but it includes people from a variety of places. There's my book that'll be coming out February 2023. So Decolonizing Design, a Cultural Justice Guidebook. And really it's about the work that I've been doing from a positionality of a Black woman in design to change the practices and the theories so that it has space for Indigenous, Black, Latinx, and other perspectives at its fore. So why does this all matter again? Because design is the way in which we give form to our everyday lives and how we communicate what is meaningful us to future generations. And so in the absence of being able to tell the story of Black design experiences, then again, we set up the same structures of erasure that affect us in terms of having to constantly articulate how Black lives matter, that how Black design matters is intimately tied up into how we express our lives. So, muchas gracias. ¿Hay preguntas? I'm going to figure it was a cool place to start. Maybe I'll stop it here. Time spiral.
Y ahí está. ¿Alguna pregunta para Dori?
Yeah.
I was wondering, talking about the Black section, how would you, I'm curious to know, like, particularly about you, how would you categorize these subjects and the collection where, like you as a collective are gathering? And I'm thinking about care with such an importance, like, with an emotional and political connection of the rituals and the day-to-day objects. So I'm wondering, like, how would you categorize them?
Yeah, I mean, this is, I think in this presentation, I did it as a time spiral, right? Because I was wanting to retell the history through objects. It's really interesting. Recently, Hannah Beachler, who I spoke about before, she did she was curated a room at the Met, at the Metropolitan Museum. And the way in which she curated it was less about time and more about, to say thematics is not to give it credit that it's due, but the kind of resonances between the past, present, and future, which we all hold within us, that I thought was a more emotionally evocative way to express what these objects mean and to do so in a way that helps to understand that there isn't a separation between the past, present, and future, especially when, as a people, your future is there's always someone who's wanting to stop your future. So I think if I was going to do it again, I would do so in a way that's more emotionally evocative. Like there's a little bit of intellectualism that is manifest in this presentation. I mean, I think it's still good to do the time spiral, but that may not be the way in which I would walk people through the space of how to engage in those objects. I might do more of a juxtaposition where it's like, okay, I'll have the Akin gold weight, but I'll put that in juxtaposition with, let's say, a image of a hip hop figure weighed down in gold chains, right? And how we begin to have a dialogue between those representations and continuations. I think I might do something more evocative in that way.
¿Pregunta?
Can I ask a question? I mean, so let's say if I'm to go to Design Museum here in Mexico City, or even to the Anthropology Museum, which I think we might go to this afternoon, would I be able to tell a story of the Black experiences in Mexico, or even in Mexico City? Because I know when I was doing the research, I was surprised by the statement that at the 1600s there were more Black people in Mexico City than there were Europeans, and yet, and again, I haven't seen much, so I asked this not even as a provocation. I asked this just of not knowing and not seeing yet.
I'm not from here. I'm actually on a little bit of a weekend getaway. But I think this last Thursday, there's an exposition at the museum, France Mayer Museum, called Feminine Design, which Elena Malet, design curator from Mexico City, opened. And I haven't been there. I think I'm going tomorrow or on Sunday. And I'm actually wondering too, because I know a lot of the work that I've seen on Instagram from the inauguration is from like really contemporary recent designers, which most of them are white with a privileged background. So I'm not sure if it includes like all of it, but I know from like woman perspective, I think it might be interesting.
Mm. Actually, we went to see it yesterday. It was very good, and I enjoyed the experience of seeing the diversity of objects and the story that was being told. Again, I would say it was hard to figure out the positionalities of the women who were featured, the designer women. It was hard to figure that out. But now I'll go, I took a lot of photos, so I might go through my photos and do some more research to kind of figure out what some of those positionalities might be.
I know that there is a research group or department within UNAM that takes care of Black history and Black populations. But because of that, I also know that it's been basically blurred from everywhere else.
Okay.
So I think if you go to museums in Mexico, you will, of course, find a lot of history of indigenous Mexicans. But I don't recall ever seeing an exhibition on the objects created by African Mexicans. So yeah, we have a lot of work to do there.
Es un buen proyecto.
So there's a couple of group of women. Well, there's one woman whose name is Junko Ogata. She's doing a lot about recognition of Mexican Black history and culture. So she has wrote several articles and books about it. Junko Ogata. She actually also participates in coaching Tenoch Huerta for his role as Namor in Wakanda Forever. And there's also a group of women called Afro Chingona, who also are working through recognizing African, well, not African, sorry, Black Mexican culture, especially in women. And as for the exhibition in Franz Mayer Museum, there's there was a portrait took of all of the women that are exhibited. It's just that they took the pictures this week, so they're gonna put a mural with all the portraits of all the women who are at the exhibition, at the entrance of the exhibition, so we can see who are we are the designers at the exhibition.
Gracias.
¿Ya no hay ninguna pregunta? ¿Comentario? Ok. Bueno, entonces doy muchas gracias por estar aquí en el programa de diseño industrial.
Muchas gracias.
UNAM, y pues seguiremos en contacto. Gracias por compartir todo este trabajo que nos ha llenado de inspiración.
Gracias.